When the most protected man in the world becomes the greatest threat to his own security, every protocol shatters. In the gilded corridors of power, loyalty faces its ultimate test as guards must choose between their oath to protect and their duty to humanity itself. The morning mist clung to the manicured gardens of Kensington Palace like a shroud of secrets waiting to be unveiled. Detective Chief Inspector Sarah Mitchell adjusted her earpiece as she walked the perimeter, her trained eyes scanning every shadow, every movement in the early dawn light. 23 years of service had taught her that danger often wore the most innocent faces. Inside the palace walls, Prince William sat in his private study, fingers drumming against the mahogany desk that had belonged to his grandmother. The weight of recent intelligence reports pressed heavy on his shoulders. Photographs scattered across the polished surface told a story that made his blood run cold. His own security detail, the men and women sworn to protect him and his family, had been compromised. The evidence was undeniable. Bank transfers from unknown offshore accounts, secret meetings in London's underground, encrypted messages that spoke of betrayal at the highest levels. But what chilled William most was the realization that the threat didn't come from outside the palace walls. It came from within. Sarah's radio crackled to life. Control to Mitchell. We have movement in the East Wing. Unauthorized personnel near the private quarters. She pressed the response button. Copy that, Control. Moving to investigate. Her hand instinctively moved to her sidearm as she changed direction toward the main building. Something felt wrong about this morning. The air itself seemed charged with tension. As she entered through the servants' entrance, Sarah noticed the unusual absence of regular staff. The corridors that normally bustled with activity at this hour stood eerily quiet. Her footsteps echoed on the polished marble floors, each sound amplifying in the silence. Meanwhile, in his study, William activated a secure communication line that bypassed the palace's regular security network. His conversation was brief but decisive. Operation Cleanse is a go. Initiate Protocol 7 immediately. The person on the other end hesitated. Your Royal Highness, are you certain this action cannot be undone? William's voice carried the weight of absolute authority. I've never been more certain of anything in my life. They've left us no choice. 3 floors below, in the palace's Security Command Center, Chief Security Officer Marcus Webb noticed anomalies appearing on multiple monitoring systems. Camera feeds flickered intermittently. Motion sensors registered phantom movements. The sophisticated electronic surveillance network that protected the royal family seemed to be experiencing systematic failures. Marcus had served in the Royal Protection Unit for 15 years. He protected William through countless public appearances, foreign visits, and private moments. But today, something in the prince's demeanor during their morning briefing had unsettled him. There was a coldness in William's eyes that he'd never seen before. "Sir," called out technical specialist Lisa Chen from her workstation, "we're getting interference patterns that match known jamming signatures. Someone's actively disrupting our systems, studying the scrolling data on her screens. Internal or external." Lisa's fingers flew over her keyboard, running diagnostics and trace programs. "That's the problem, sir. The signals are originating from inside the palace, multiple locations." The implications hit Marcus like a physical blow. An inside job meant that someone with intimate knowledge of palace security was working against them. But more troubling was the systematic nature of the disruption. This wasn't random sabotage. This was preparation for something bigger. Sarah reached the East Wing without encountering the unauthorized personnel mentioned in the radio call. She found the corridor empty, but her instincts screamed that something was terribly wrong. The portraits of long-dead royals seemed to watch her with knowing eyes as she moved through the ornate hallway. Her earpiece buzzed with an encrypted message. "All units, report to Main Security Office immediately. Priority Alpha protocols now in effect." Priority Alpha meant imminent threat to royal family members. Sarah had heard those words only twice before in her career, and both times lives had been lost. She quickened her pace, but as she turned the corner toward the main security office, she found her path blocked by 4 men in tactical gear. "Detective Chief Inspector Mitchell," one of them said, his voice muffled by his helmet. "You need to come with us." Something about their stance, their equipment, their entire presence felt wrong. These weren't regular palace security. Their gear was too advanced, too military. "I need to see identification," Sarah said, her hand moving slowly toward her weapon. "That won't be necessary," the lead figure replied. "We're operating under direct royal authority." Before Sarah could respond, her radio exploded with chatter. Multiple units reporting security breaches throughout the palace. Staff members being escorted to secure locations, all external communications being jammed. The palace was being locked down from the inside. In his study, William watched the security monitors with grim satisfaction. Phase 1 of Operation Cleanse was proceeding exactly as planned. The corrupt members of his security detail were being identified and isolated. But he knew the hardest part was yet to come. His private phone rang. The caller ID showed his wife Catherine's number. He let it ring, knowing that answering would only complicate what had to be done. The burden of protecting his family, his country, and the crown itself rested solely on his shoulders now. Marcus Webb found himself face-to-face with a sight that defied everything he thought he knew about palace security. Armed personnel he didn't recognize had taken control of the main security office. His own team sat at their workstations under armed guard, their usual authority stripped away. "What's the meaning of this?" Marcus demanded, but his words were met with silence from the tactical team. Lisa Chen caught his eye and mouthed a single word: William. The realization hit Marcus like a sledgehammer. The prince himself had ordered this operation. But why? What threat could possibly justify turning the palace into an armed camp and treating loyal security personnel like prisoners? His questions were answered when a familiar voice spoke from behind him. "Because, Marcus, loyalty can be bought and trust can be betrayed." Marcus turned to see Prince William entering the security office, flanked by men Marcus didn't recognize. The prince's expression was harder than steel, his eyes carrying the weight of terrible knowledge. "Your Royal Highness," Marcus began, but William raised a hand to silence him. "3 days ago, I received intelligence that shook me to my core," William said, his voice carrying across the silent room. "A plot to assassinate my entire family, orchestrated from within these very walls by people I trusted with our lives." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Sarah Mitchell, now under guard in the corridor outside, heard them through the open door and felt her world shift on its axis. Everything she thought she knew about palace security, about loyalty, about trust, was crumbling around her. William continued, his gaze sweeping across the faces of his security team. "The evidence is irrefutable. Financial records, communication intercepts, surveillance footage. The conspiracy reaches deeper than any of us imagined." Marcus felt his mouth go dry. In all his years of service, he'd never questioned his colleagues' loyalty. The idea that some of them might be working against the royal family was incomprehensible. "Sir," Marcus found his voice, "surely there's been some mistake. These people have dedicated their lives to protecting you and your family." William's expression didn't soften. "Have they, Marcus, or have they been playing a longer game, waiting for the perfect moment to strike?" As if summoned by an invisible signal, more tactical personnel entered the room. They moved with military precision, their faces hidden behind tactical masks. Sarah watched from the corridor as they began separating the regular security staff, apparently based on some predetermined list. The morning sun climbed higher outside the palace windows, but inside the building darkness seemed to be falling. The systematic dismantling of the security structure that had protected the royal family for generations was happening with clockwork precision. Technical specialist Lisa Chen found herself being escorted away from her workstation. As she passed Sarah in the corridor, she managed to whisper, "Check the server room. Something's not right about the data." Sarah filed this information away, knowing it might be crucial later. But for now, she was as powerless as everyone else to stop whatever William had set in motion. In the palace kitchens, staff members who had arrived for their morning shifts found themselves being questioned by stern-faced personnel. Cook Mary Henderson, who had served the royal household for 30 years, couldn't understand why she was being asked about her financial arrangements and personal associations. "I've never done anything but serve this family loyally," she protested to her interrogator, tears streaming down her weathered cheeks. The response was clinical and cold. "That's what they all say, Mrs. Henderson." Throughout the palace, similar scenes were playing out. Gardeners, housekeepers, maintenance staff, and security personnel alike found themselves subject to intense scrutiny. The centuries-old institution was being dissected with surgical precision, and no one seemed immune from suspicion. Back in the security office, William addressed his remaining team members. "I know this is difficult to understand. I know you have questions about colleagues you've worked with for years, but I need you to understand that the threat to my family is real and immediate." He activated a wall display that showed photographs, financial records, and communication transcripts. "This conspiracy has been years in the making. The perpetrators have been patient, methodical, and extremely careful. But they made one crucial mistake." The display shifted to show surveillance footage from various locations around London. They assumed their communications were secure. They assumed their financial transactions were untraceable. They assumed wrong. Sarah, still under guard in the corridor, strained to hear every word. Something about William's presentation felt rehearsed, almost theatrical. Her detective instincts, honed by decades of investigating complex cases, detected inconsistencies in the narrative being presented. The morning that had begun with routine security checks had transformed into something unprecedented in the history of the British royal family. The palace, traditionally a symbol of stability and continuity, had become the center of a security crisis that threatened to shake the monarchy to its foundations. As the first phase of Operation Cleanse reached its conclusion, those caught in its net began to understand that their lives would never be the same. Trust, once broken, could never be fully restored. And in the corridors of Kensington Palace, the echoes of that breaking trust would resonate for years to come. The sun climbed higher in the London sky, but inside the palace walls, the shadows were just beginning to fall. The sound of footsteps echoed through the marble corridors as palace staff were systematically moved to secure holding areas. Detective Chief Inspector Sarah Mitchell watched the proceedings with growing unease. Her years of police work had taught her to recognize the signs of a cover-up, and what she was witnessing bore all the hallmarks of something far more complex than a simple security breach. In the West Wing of the palace, Catherine, Princess of Wales, paced nervously in her private sitting room. Her children had been moved to a secure location hours earlier without explanation, and her husband's behavior that morning had been unlike anything she'd ever witnessed. The William she knew was decisive but fair, strong but compassionate. The man who had issued the lockdown orders seemed like a stranger. Her lady-in-waiting, Elena Thornbury, sat quietly in the corner, her usual chatter replaced by tense silence. Elena had worked for the royal household for 8 years, and she'd never seen the palace in such chaos. Staff members were disappearing one by one, escorted away by personnel no one recognized. "Your Royal Highness," Elena ventured carefully, "perhaps you should try calling His Royal Highness again." "Surely he can explain what's happening." Catherine shook her head. "I've tried 12 times. He's not taking my calls." She moved to the window, gazing out at the gardens where armed figures now patrolled in broad daylight. "This isn't like him, Elena. Something's very wrong." Meanwhile, in the palace's communications center, Senior Communications Officer David Hartwell found himself face-to-face with technology he didn't recognize. The mysterious tactical team had installed new equipment that was intercepting and analyzing all incoming and outgoing communications. Every phone call, every text message, every email was being monitored in real time. "Sir," he addressed the team leader, whose name tag read Commander Brooks, "this level of surveillance requires authorization from the highest levels of government. Do you have the proper warrants?" Brooks didn't look up from his screen. "We have all the authorization we need, Mr. Peter Hartwell. Your job is to cooperate, not to question." The response chilled David more than the morning air. He'd worked in government communications for 15 years and had never encountered such absolute authority exercised without proper documentation. Whatever was happening went beyond normal security protocols. In the basement levels of the palace, Marcus Webb found himself in a holding area with 12 other members of the security team. The room had been hastily converted from a storage area, with temporary lighting and basic furniture. Guards stood at every exit, their faces hidden behind tactical masks. "This is insane," whispered Security Officer Amanda Price, who had protected the royal children for the past 5 years. "We're being treated like criminals." Marcus studied the other detained personnel. They represented some of the most experienced and trusted members of the Royal Protection Unit. If these people were truly compromised, then the conspiracy William described was more extensive than anyone could have imagined. But if they were innocent, then something else entirely was happening. "Has anyone been able to contact their families?" asked another officer, Robert Chen, Lisa's husband who worked in the palace's technical security division. The question was met with shaking heads. All personal communications had been confiscated, and they'd been told that contact with the outside world was temporarily prohibited for security reasons. Above them, Prince William conducted a secure video conference with individuals whose faces remained obscured on the screen. The conversation was terse and businesslike, focusing on timelines, logistics, and what they referred to as acceptable casualties. "The list is comprehensive," William stated, reviewing a document on his tablet. 47 individuals with confirmed or suspected involvement. "The remainder will be processed and cleared for return to duty." One of the voices from the screen responded, "Your Royal Highness, are you certain about the domestic staff? Some of these people have worked for your family for decades." William's expression remained unchanged. "Loyalty can be inherited, but so can corruption. We cannot afford to make exceptions based on sentiment." The clinical nature of the conversation would have shocked anyone who knew the prince's usual compassionate demeanor. But the weight of protecting his family had transformed him into someone capable of making the hardest decisions imaginable. Sarah Mitchell, meanwhile, had been moved to a different area of the palace. Her detective skills allowed her to piece together fragments of information from overheard conversations and observed activities. The operation was far more extensive than initially apparent, involving dozens of outside personnel who had taken control of critical palace functions. During a brief moment when her guards were distracted, Sarah managed to slip away and make her way toward the server room that Lisa Chen had mentioned. The corridors leading to the technical areas were mostly deserted, the regular staff having been moved to holding areas. The server room door was slightly ajar, and Sarah could hear the hum of computers working beyond their normal capacity. She peered inside and saw banks of equipment that didn't belong to the palace's standard systems. Data was being copied, analyzed, and transmitted at an extraordinary rate. "Detective Inspector," a voice said behind her, causing Sarah to spin around. She found herself facing a woman in civilian clothes who carried herself with military precision. "I'm Agent Caroline Winters, MI5. I think we need to talk." The revelation that MI5 was involved added another layer of complexity to the situation. Sarah followed Agent Winters to a small office that had been set up as a temporary command post. "What I'm about to tell you is classified at the highest levels," Winters began. "But given your position and your reputation for integrity, you need to understand what's really happening here." Sarah leaned forward, her detective instincts fully engaged. "I'm listening. 3 months ago, we intercepted communications suggesting a plot against the royal family. Not just an assassination attempt, but something far more sophisticated. A systematic infiltration designed to compromise the monarchy from within." The agent activated a laptop, showing Sarah encrypted messages and financial records. "The conspiracy involves foreign intelligence services working with domestic extremist groups. Their goal isn't just to harm the royal family physically, but to undermine the institution of the monarchy itself." Sarah studied the evidence, her trained eye picking out inconsistencies and patterns. "This is extensive, but something doesn't add up. The timing, the scope of the response, the involvement of personnel I don't recognize." Agent Winters nodded approvingly. "You're right to be suspicious, because what I've told you so far is only part of the truth." Before she could continue, alarms began sounding throughout the palace. The building's emergency lighting system activated, casting everything in an eerie red glow. Over the intercom system, Prince William's voice announced, "All personnel report to designated assembly areas immediately." This is not a drill. In the holding area where Marcus Webb and his colleagues waited, the guards suddenly became more agitated. Radio chatter increased, and additional personnel arrived to reinforce their positions. Something was escalating beyond the original plan. Catherine, still confined to her sitting room, watched through her window as helicopters appeared in the sky above the palace. These weren't the usual royal transport aircraft, but military helicopters that circled the building like predators. Her phone finally rang, displaying William's number. She answered immediately. "William, what in God's name is happening?" His voice was strained, carrying exhaustion and stress she'd never heard before. "Catherine, I need you to listen carefully. Pack only essential items and prepare to leave the palace. You and the children are being moved to a secure location." "William, you're scaring me. Please tell me what's going on." There was a long pause before he responded. "I can't explain everything over the phone, but I need you to trust me. Everything I'm doing is to protect you and our children." The call ended abruptly, leaving Catherine staring at her phone in disbelief. In 30 minutes, her world had gone from peaceful routine to something resembling a military coup. In the palace's main security office, the mysterious Commander Brooks received a priority message that caused his expression to change dramatically. He immediately began issuing new orders to his team, and the entire tone of the operation shifted from controlled investigation to urgent crisis response. "Sir," one of his subordinates reported, "we're detecting unusual activity at the main gates. Multiple vehicles approaching with government plates." Brooks moved to the window, using binoculars to observe the approaching convoy. What he saw made him reach for his secure communication device. "Control, this is Brooks. We have government officials arriving unannounced." This was not part of the plan. The response from the other end was sharp and immediate. "Maintain position and proceed as briefed. Do not deviate from the mission parameters regardless of outside interference." Sarah Mitchell, still with Agent Winters, watched the unfolding crisis with growing alarm. The woman claiming to be MI5 seemed as surprised by the escalating situation as everyone else. "Agent Winters," Sarah said carefully, "I need to ask you something directly. Are you really MI5? The woman's hesitation lasted just a fraction of a second, but it was enough to confirm Sarah's suspicions. "Detective Inspector, the situation is more complicated than I initially indicated." Before Sarah could respond, the door burst open and several armed personnel entered. "Both of you, come with us now." their leader commanded. As they were escorted through the corridors, Sarah caught glimpses of the palace being systematically sealed. Windows were being covered, external communications were being jammed, and the building was being transformed from a royal residence into something resembling a fortress. The morning's events had spiraled far beyond a simple security investigation. Whatever William had initiated was now taking on a life of its own, with consequences that no one could predict or control. In his private study, Prince William stared at surveillance monitors showing every corner of the palace grounds. The weight of his decisions pressed down on him like a physical burden. He'd started this operation to protect his family from a very real threat, but the cure was beginning to seem worse than the disease. His secure phone buzzed with an incoming message. Phase 2 initiation approved. Proceed with extreme prejudice. William's hand hovered over the response button. Everything he'd worked for, everything he'd sacrificed, had led to this moment. The next decision would determine not just the fate of his family, but the future of the British monarchy itself. Outside, London continued its daily routine, unaware that one of its most famous landmarks had become the center of a crisis that would test the very foundations of the nation's institutions. The palace that had stood as a symbol of stability for centuries was about to become the stage for events that would change everything. The convoy of black government vehicles screeched to a halt outside Kensington Palace's main gates. Home Secretary Margaret Sinclair emerged from the lead vehicle, her face grim with determination. She'd received fragmentary reports about unusual activity at the palace, but nothing had prepared her for the sight that greeted her. Armed personnel she didn't recognize had taken positions throughout the grounds, and the usual ceremonial guards were nowhere to be seen. Minister, her security detail leader approached cautiously, the palace appears to be under some form of lockdown. We're not receiving responses to our standard communication protocols. Margaret straightened her jacket and walked purposefully toward the main entrance. Then we'll use non-standard protocols. I have constitutional authority to access any royal residence in times of crisis. Inside the palace, Commander Brooks watched the government officials approach through high-powered surveillance equipment. His orders had been explicit. No outside interference was to be tolerated during the operation. But confronting the Home Secretary directly would escalate the situation beyond anyone's ability to contain it. He activated his secure communication link. Control, we have a Code 7 situation. Government oversight attempting to breach the perimeter. The response was immediate and cold. Neutralize the threat using whatever means necessary. Brooks hesitated. The orders he'd been following had pushed ethical boundaries, but they'd remained within the realm of plausible security operations. What he was now being asked to do crossed into territory that could destroy them all. Meanwhile, in the palace basement, Marcus Webb had begun organizing the detained security personnel. His years of military training before joining Royal Protection had taught him that in crisis situations, leadership vacuums were dangerous for everyone involved. Listen carefully, he whispered to the group, keeping his voice low enough to avoid detection by their guards. Something about this operation doesn't match standard counterintelligence protocols. We need to be prepared for the possibility that we're dealing with something other than what we've been told. Security Officer Amanda Price nodded grimly. The equipment they're using, the personnel they brought in, none of it matches normal royal protection procedures. This feels more like a hostile takeover than a security sweep. Technical specialist Robert Chen, who had been quietly observing their captors, added his own concerns. The communication systems they've installed are designed for data extraction, not security monitoring. They're copying everything. Financial records, personal communications, operational protocols. This isn't about finding traitors. It's about gathering intelligence. Their whispered conference was interrupted by the arrival of new guards, who began separating the detained personnel into smaller groups. Marcus found himself being escorted to a different area entirely, away from his colleagues. The divide-and-conquer strategy was classic intelligence tradecraft, designed to prevent coordination and increase psychological pressure. In her sitting room, Catherine received an unexpected visitor. A woman she didn't recognize entered under armed escort, introducing herself as Dr. Ordinary Places Sarah Hamilton, a crisis counselor brought in to help royal family members process the traumatic events. Your Royal Highness, Dr. Hamilton said with professional sympathy, I understand this has been an extremely difficult day for you. I'm here to help you and your children cope with the necessary security measures. Catherine studied the woman carefully. Something about her manner seemed rehearsed, almost scripted. Dr. Hamilton, I appreciate your concern, but what I need most right now is to speak with my husband and understand what's happening to our home. I'm afraid that's not possible at the moment, the doctor replied smoothly. Prince William is dealing with extremely sensitive security matters, but I can assure you that everything being done is for your protection and the protection of your children. The conversation felt like an interrogation disguised as therapy, and Catherine's instincts told her to be very careful about what she revealed. The woman claiming to be a crisis counselor was asking probing questions about palace routines, staff relationships, and family security arrangements. Detective Chief Inspector Sarah Mitchell found herself in a sterile interrogation room, facing two individuals who claimed to represent national security interests. The woman who had identified herself as Agent Winters was notably absent, replaced by harder-faced questioners who showed no pretense of courtesy. Detective Inspector, the lead interrogator began, consulting a thick file. Your record shows exemplary service and unwavering loyalty to the Crown. That's why we're giving you the opportunity to cooperate fully with this investigation. Sarah maintained her professional composure despite the threatening undertone. I'm always willing to cooperate with legitimate investigations, but I need to see proper identification and understand the legal authority under which I'm being questioned. The interrogator's smile was cold and calculating. Detective Inspector, I think you misunderstand the situation. This isn't a request for cooperation. This is a national security matter that transcends normal legal procedures. He opened the file, revealing photographs and documents that made Sarah's blood run cold. Images of her apartment, her daily routes to work, her few close friends and family members. They'd been watching her far longer than just today. Now, the interrogator continued, let's discuss what you observed during your time at the palace and what conclusions you may have drawn about ongoing security operations. The interrogation was professional, but deeply unsettling. Sarah realized that she wasn't just a witness to whatever was happening. She was a potential threat to be neutralized. Her detective experience and her access to palace security made her dangerous to whoever was really running this operation. Meanwhile, Home Secretary Margaret Sinclair found herself in a tense standoff at the palace gates. The personnel blocking her entry wore no identifying badges or unit insignia, and they refused to acknowledge her constitutional authority. I am the Home Secretary of the United Kingdom, she stated firmly, and I have both the right and the responsibility to ensure the safety of the royal family. Stand aside immediately. The response came from a figure she assumed was the operation commander. Ma'am, with respect, the royal family is secure and protected. Your presence at this time would compromise ongoing security operations. Margaret's years in politics had taught her to recognize official evasion, and what she was hearing didn't sound like any government operation she was familiar with. She activated her secure phone and placed a call that would escalate the crisis to the highest levels of government. Prime Minister, she said when the call connected, we have a situation at Kensington Palace that requires immediate cabinet-level attention. I'm being denied access by personnel I cannot identify operating under questionable authority. Inside the palace, Prince William was beginning to understand that the operation he had authorized was spiraling beyond his control. The intelligence he'd received about threats to his family had been compelling, but the response had taken on a momentum of its own. His secure communication system buzzed with an incoming priority message. Phase 3 approved for immediate implementation. Recommend rapid conclusion of current operations before external complications multiply. William stared at the message, trying to understand what Phase 3 might involve. The operational briefings he'd received had been vague about later phases, focusing primarily on identifying and neutralizing immediate threats. Now he was beginning to suspect that his role in this operation was more limited than he'd initially believed. Commander Brooks received new orders that made him question everything he thought he understood about the mission. The directive was clear: prepare for immediate evacuation of all operational personnel, leaving behind a situation that would be blamed on the very people they had detained. The realization hit him like a physical blow. They weren't just investigating a conspiracy, they were creating one. The detained palace staff would be left to face accusations they couldn't defend against, while the real operatives disappeared without a trace. In the palace server room, the data extraction operation reached its final phase. Terabytes of information about royal family activities, government communications, and national security protocols were being copied to encrypted drives for transport to unknown destinations. Technical specialist Lisa Chen, who had been moved to a different holding area, managed to catch a glimpse of the operation through a partially open door. Her expertise told her immediately that this wasn't defensive security work, it was systematic intelligence gathering on a massive scale. Sarah Mitchell, still under interrogation, made a decision that would change everything. Drawing on her years of police training, she began providing answers that seemed cooperative while actually revealing nothing of value. But more importantly, she started asking questions that made her interrogators uncomfortable. If this is truly a security operation to protect the royal family, she said carefully, why are you asking me about palace communication systems and staff schedules Rather than focusing on the specific threats you've identified, the question hung in the air like an accusation. Her interrogators exchanged glances, and Sarah knew she'd struck a nerve. Whatever was really happening, it wasn't what had been presented to Prince William or to the detained staff. Catherine, growing increasingly suspicious of the so-called crisis counselor, excused herself to use the bathroom. Once alone, she retrieved a hidden phone, a backup device William didn't know about, and managed to send a brief encrypted message to her private secretary who was outside the palace. The message was simple: not safe. Get help. The response came quickly. Already working on it. Stay strong. The knowledge that someone outside the palace was aware of the situation and working to help gave Catherine a glimmer of hope, but it also made her realize how dangerous her situation had become. As afternoon approached, the various threads of the crisis began to converge in ways that no one had anticipated. Government officials demanded access while being blocked by unidentified personnel. Detained palace staff began to understand they were victims rather than subjects of investigation. And Prince William started to grasp that he had been manipulated into authorizing an operation that served interests far beyond protecting his family. The palace that had weathered centuries of political upheaval and social change was about to face its greatest challenge, not from external enemies, but from the very people who claimed to be protecting it. In his study, William made a decision that would either save his family and the monarchy or destroy everything he'd spent his life trying to protect. He activated an emergency communication protocol that hadn't been used in decades, sending a coded message that would mobilize forces beyond the control of whoever was really running the operation. The message was brief but decisive. Crown compromised. Invoke Dunkirk Protocol. Immediate assistance required. As the afternoon shadows lengthened across the palace grounds, all the players in this deadly game began to understand that the real battle was just beginning. The emergency response to Prince William's Dunkirk Protocol activation began within minutes. Across London, secure phones buzzed in the offices of individuals whose existence was known only to the highest echelons of government. The protocol, established during World War II and updated for modern threats, represented the ultimate safeguard for the British Crown in times of existential crisis. Colonel James Ashworth, commander of the regiment's most classified unit, received the alert while reviewing intelligence reports in his Thames House office. The Dunkirk Protocol meant that the monarchy faced immediate, overwhelming threat and that all normal chains of command were potentially compromised. He had 15 minutes to mobilize assets that had been prepared for this scenario but never actually deployed. Meanwhile, the mysterious operatives controlling Kensington Palace began to realize that their carefully planned operation was encountering unexpected complications. Commander Brooks watched through surveillance monitors as military vehicles began appearing at strategic positions around London. Someone had activated countermeasures that weren't supposed to exist. "Control, we have a problem," he reported through his secure channel. "Government forces are mobilizing in response to something. The timeline needs to be accelerated immediately." The response was sharp and urgent. "Initiate immediate extraction. Leave the package in place and exfiltrate all personnel within 30 minutes. Brooks understood the cold terminology. The package referred to the evidence they had planted to frame the detained palace staff for the conspiracy they had fabricated. When the smoke cleared, loyal servants of the crown would be blamed for a plot that existed only in manufactured documents and falsified communications. In the palace basement, Marcus Webb sensed the change in his captor's behavior. The guards who had maintained professional detachment throughout the day were now showing signs of stress and urgency. Equipment was being hastily packed, and personnel were receiving new orders through earpieces. "Something's changed," he whispered to security officer Amanda Price, who was in the adjacent holding cell. "They're preparing to leave." Amanda had reached the same conclusion. "If they're pulling out, it means they're about to trigger whatever this was really about. We need to find a way to warn someone." Their opportunity came when one of the guards received an urgent radio call that drew him away from his position. Marcus, using skills learned during his military service, quickly assessed the lock mechanism on their holding cell. It was sophisticated, but not impossible for someone with his training. Detective Chief Inspector Sarah Mitchell's interrogation had taken a darker turn. Her questioners were no longer pretending this was a routine security matter. The files they were showing her contained detailed dossiers on dozens of palace staff members, complete with fabricated evidence of criminal activity and foreign connections. "You can see the scope of the conspiracy, Detective Inspector," her lead interrogator said with false sympathy. "These people have been planning to harm the royal family for months. Your cooperation in documenting what you observed will be crucial for the prosecution." Sarah studied the manufactured evidence with her trained detective's eye. The documents were professionally created but contained subtle inconsistencies that revealed their true nature. Financial records showed transactions that didn't align with normal banking procedures. Communication intercepts contained language patterns that didn't match the supposed authors. Most damning of all, the timeline of the alleged conspiracy coincided perfectly with increased activity by unknown intelligence operatives around the palace. "This is all fabricated," she said quietly, meeting her interrogator's gaze. "You're not investigating a conspiracy, you're creating one." The man's expression hardened. "Detective Inspector, I strongly advise you to reconsider your assessment. The evidence speaks for itself."
"Yes, it does," Sarah replied.
"It speaks of a sophisticated intelligence operation designed to discredit and remove loyal palace staff. The question is why, and on whose behalf?" Her defiance triggered immediate action. Additional personnel entered the interrogation room, and Sarah understood that her usefulness as a cooperative witness had ended. She was now a liability to be managed. Outside the palace, Home Secretary Margaret Sinclair had coordinated a response that was causing serious problems for the operations controllers. Government ministers, senior police officials, and intelligence service directors were converging on the area, demanding explanations for the unprecedented lockdown of a royal residence. Deputy Prime Minister Robert Crawford arrived with a security detail that included personnel from multiple agencies. The complexity of jurisdictions and authorities was making it impossible for the mysterious operatives to maintain their cover story. Home Secretary Crawford approached Margaret with visible concern. "The Prime Minister has been briefed on the situation. We need immediate access to the palace to assess the safety of the royal family." Margaret pointed toward the main gates, where armed personnel continued to block entry. "We're being denied access by individuals who won't identify themselves or provide legal authority for their actions. This goes far beyond any authorized security operation." The standoff escalated when Colonel Ashworth's tactical team arrived. The Dunkirk Protocol gave them extraordinary authority, including the power to override other government agencies when the crown was threatened. Their arrival changed the entire dynamic of the confrontation. Inside the palace, Prince William was beginning to understand the true scope of what he had unknowingly facilitated. The intelligence briefings that had convinced him to authorize the operation were being revealed as sophisticated deceptions designed to manipulate him into providing access and authority for something far more sinister. His secure phone rang with an incoming call from a number he didn't recognize. When he answered, a voice he had never heard before spoke with quiet authority. "Your Royal Highness, this is Colonel Ashworth, Special Operations. I'm responding to your Dunkirk Protocol activation. Are you safe?" The question seemed simple, but William realized he didn't know the answer. "Colonel, I'm not certain. The situation has become extremely complex, and I'm no longer sure who I can trust. Sir, we're preparing to enter the palace and secure your safety. Can you confirm your current location and the location of your immediate family?" William provided the information. But as he spoke, he noticed movement outside his study windows. The mysterious operatives who had been conducting the security sweep were evacuating with obvious urgency, taking equipment and documents but leaving personnel behind. Catherine, still under the watchful eye of the fake crisis counselor, received a text message on her hidden phone that made her heart race. "Cavalry coming. Stay low." She realized that help was indeed on the way. But the danger was far from over. The operatives who had taken control of the palace would not surrender their position easily, and the transition period would be the most dangerous time for everyone involved. Technical specialist Lisa Chen, using knowledge gained from years of working with palace security systems, had managed to access a maintenance terminal in her holding area. What she discovered in the system logs confirmed her worst fears. The mysterious operatives had indeed been conducting systematic intelligence gathering, but they had also been implanting false evidence throughout the palace's digital infrastructure. Every computer system, every communication device, every electronic record was being compromised with fabricated data that would support the conspiracy narrative they had created. When the operation concluded, dozens of innocent palace staff would face criminal charges based on evidence that existed only in manipulated files. Lisa began working frantically to document the tampering before the operatives could complete their sabotage. Her expertise in digital forensics allowed her to trace the modifications and create a record of the manipulation, but she knew time was running out. Commander Brooks received his final orders as military vehicles surrounded the palace grounds. "All personnel extract immediately. Activate the insurance package and prepare for full disavowal." The insurance package was the most chilling aspect of the entire operation. If the extraction couldn't be completed cleanly, the operatives were prepared to trigger an incident that would justify their presence and actions. The detained palace staff would become casualties of a terrorist attack that would cover the tracks of the real perpetrators. Marcus Webb, having successfully opened his holding cell, moved carefully through the basement corridors. His military training guided him as he avoided the remaining guards and searched for evidence of what had really been happening. What he discovered in a hastily abandoned command post filled him with horror and determination. Computer screens still displayed operational plans that revealed the true scope of the conspiracy. This wasn't just an intelligence-gathering operation or even a simple frame-up. The ultimate goal was to create a crisis that would justify fundamental changes to the relationship between the monarchy and the government. With unknown foreign interests positioned to benefit from the chaos, Sarah Mitchell, now under heavy guard, was being moved through the palace corridors when the building's alarm system activated. Emergency lighting bathed everything in red as automated systems detected unauthorized intrusions and initiated lockdown procedures. The competing security protocols, the palace's legitimate systems versus the operatives' overrides, created confusion that she might be able to exploit. Colonel Ashworth's team breached the palace perimeter with precision and overwhelming force. Their training for this exact scenario allowed them to differentiate between legitimate palace staff and the mysterious operatives who had taken control. But the fog of war in an urban environment made every decision potentially deadly. Prince William, watching the confrontation unfold from his study windows, understood that the next few minutes would determine the fate of his family, the monarchy, and potentially the British government itself. The forces he had unknowingly unleashed were beyond his control, and the resolution would depend on the skill and dedication of people whose names he might never know. As military personnel moved through the palace corridors searching for threats and securing areas, they discovered the true scope of the deception that had been perpetrated. Hidden equipment, planted evidence, and compromised systems painted a picture of an operation so sophisticated that it could only have been planned and executed by state-level actors. The afternoon that had begun with a security sweep had become a battle for the very soul of the British establishment. In the corridors of Kensington Palace, loyalty and betrayal, truth and deception were about to be separated in the most dramatic fashion imaginable. The clash between Colonel Ashworth's tactical team and the mysterious operatives erupted throughout Kensington Palace with the intensity of a small war. In the main corridor, genuine British special forces encountered resistance from personnel whose training and equipment suggested foreign military origins. The engagement was brief but decisive, with the legitimate authorities quickly gaining the upper hand through superior knowledge of the building's layout. Prince William, escorted by Colonel Ashworth himself, was rushed to a secure area while teams systematically cleared the palace of hostile operatives. The prince's face reflected the horror of understanding how completely he had been manipulated. The intelligence reports that had seemed so compelling, the evidence that had appeared irrefutable, had all been part of an elaborate deception designed to turn him against his own people.
Colonel, William said as they moved through corridors now secured by his own guards, how extensive is the damage?
How many of our people have been harmed by my actions? Ashworth's response was professional but sympathetic. Sir, the full assessment will take time, but I can tell you that your activation of the Dunkirk Protocol prevented a catastrophic outcome. Without that action, dozens of loyal servants would have faced false accusations with fabricated evidence. In the basement levels, Marcus Webb emerged from hiding to find palace security personnel being freed by the legitimate tactical teams. His fellow officers, detained for hours as suspected traitors, were discovering that they had been victims of one of the most sophisticated intelligence operations ever attempted against the British Crown. Security officer Amanda Price, tears streaming down her face, embraced Marcus as they were reunited with their colleagues. "They were going to blame us for everything," she whispered. "All those files, all that evidence, it was all fake." Marcus nodded grimly. But they made one crucial mistake. They underestimated the loyalty and determination of the people they were trying to frame. Detective Chief Inspector Sarah Mitchell was discovered in a storage room where she had been secured after her interrogators realized she had identified their deception. Her detective instincts and refusal to accept fabricated evidence had made her too dangerous to the operation's success. Colonel Ashworth personally oversaw her release, recognizing that her insights would be crucial for understanding the full scope of what had occurred. "Detective Inspector," he said as her restraints were removed, "your resistance to their manipulation may have saved the monarchy itself. We need your professional analysis of what you observed." Sarah stretched her cramped muscles and considered the implications of the day's events. "Colonel, this wasn't just an intelligence operation. It was a systematic attempt to destroy public confidence in the royal family and the government institutions that protect them. The sophistication suggests state-level backing with extensive resources and long-term planning." Technical specialist Lisa Chen was found at a computer terminal, frantically documenting the digital evidence of the operative's activities. Her forensic analysis had created an irrefutable record of how the conspiracy evidence had been fabricated and implanted throughout the palace's systems. "I've got it all," she reported to Colonel Ashworth's technical team. "Every falsified document, every manufactured communication, every planted piece of evidence. They were thorough, but they left digital fingerprints that tell the real story." Her husband, Robert, freed from detention in another part of the building, joined her at the terminal. Together, they began the process of reversing the digital contamination that had been intended to support false charges against dozens of innocent people. Catherine, Princess of Wales, was reunited with Prince William in a scene that epitomized the personal cost of the day's events. The fake crisis counselor who had been questioning her was revealed to be a foreign intelligence operative whose real purpose had been extracting information about royal family routines and security procedures. "William," Catherine said, holding him tightly, "promise me you'll never again make decisions like this without trusting the people who have dedicated their lives to protecting us." William's response carried the weight of hard-learned wisdom. "I promise, Catherine. I let fear and manipulation override trust and loyalty. It's a mistake I'll never make again." Their children, kept in secure locations throughout the crisis, were safely returned as the palace gradually resumed normal operations. The youngest asked innocent questions about why there had been so many strangers in their home, not understanding that they had been at the center of an international incident that would have repercussions for years to come. Home Secretary Margaret Sinclair entered the palace as the situation was finally declared secure. Her confrontation with the mysterious operatives at the gates had been the first indication to outside authorities that something was seriously wrong with the supposed security operation. "Your Royal Highness," she addressed Prince William with both respect and concern, "the government will conduct a full investigation into how this operation was able to proceed with apparent official sanction. The deception was so sophisticated that it fooled intelligence professionals and government ministers. The investigation would eventually reveal connections to hostile foreign intelligence services that had spent years developing the capability to conduct such operations. The attack on the royal family had been a test case for techniques that could be used against other democratic institutions worldwide." Commander Brooks, the operative who had led the palace takeover, was captured attempting to leave the country with encrypted drives containing the stolen intelligence. His interrogation would provide crucial insights into the international conspiracy that had targeted the British monarchy, but many questions would remain unanswered for years to come. The palace staff who had been detained and threatened throughout the ordeal were individually debriefed and offered counseling to help them process the trauma of being accused of treason against the institution they had sworn to serve. Cook Mary Henderson, who had wept in her interrogation, was personally thanked by Prince William for her decades of faithful service. "Your loyalty was never in doubt," he told her and the other staff members during an emotional gathering in the palace's main hall. "It was my judgment that failed, and I ask your forgiveness for the fear and suffering you endured because of my decisions." The response from the assembled staff was immediate and overwhelming. Despite their ordeal, their loyalty to the royal family remained unshaken. Their forgiveness came freely, accompanied by renewed dedication to their duties and their protective role. Detective Chief Inspector Sarah Mitchell was asked to lead a joint investigation with MI5 and other intelligence agencies to understand how the deception had been so complete and how similar operations could be prevented in the future. Her detective skills and her experience as a victim of the conspiracy gave her unique insights into the operatives' methods. The most disturbing aspect, she reported to the investigative committee weeks later, was how they used genuine security concerns to justify illegitimate actions. They identified real vulnerabilities and then exploited them for purposes that had nothing to do with protection. Technical specialists Lisa and Robert Chen were promoted to lead a new cybersecurity unit dedicated to protecting royal communications and digital infrastructure from sophisticated foreign interference. Their experience during the crisis had shown both the vulnerabilities of existing systems and the importance of having experts who could recognize and counter digital deception. Colonel Ashworth's rapid response to the Dunkirk Protocol activation became a classified case study in crisis management. The protocol itself was updated based on lessons learned, ensuring that future threats could be countered even more effectively. The international repercussions of the failed operation extended far beyond Britain's borders. Allied intelligence services began investigating similar deception campaigns in their own countries, discovering that the attack on the British royal family was part of a broader effort to undermine democratic institutions worldwide. Prince William's personal transformation was perhaps the most significant long-term consequence of the crisis. The experience of being manipulated into betraying his own people fundamentally changed his approach to leadership and decision-making. He became more consultative, more trusting of his advisors, and more skeptical of intelligence that confirmed his assumptions. Leadership, he reflected in a private conversation with Catherine months later, means having the courage to trust the right people, especially when fear tells you to trust no one. The palace itself was restored to its normal operations within days, but the psychological scars would take much longer to heal. Every staff member who had lived through the crisis carried the knowledge that their loyalty had been questioned and their lives disrupted by forces beyond their understanding or control. Yet from that trauma came a stronger institution. The bonds between the royal family and their staff, tested by deception and manipulation, emerged more resilient than ever. The conspiracy that had been designed to destroy trust had ultimately reinforced it. 6 months after the crisis, Kensington Palace appeared unchanged to outside observers. Tourists photographed the gates where Home Secretary Sinclair had confronted mysterious operatives. Children played in the gardens where armed foreigners had once patrolled. The continuity of centuries was maintained, but those who knew understood that something fundamental had shifted. In his private study, Prince William kept a small reminder of that terrible day, a photograph of his security team, including those who had been detained and accused. Above it, a simple inscription: "Loyalty tested is loyalty proven." The crown had survived its greatest modern challenge not through power or authority, but through the dedication of ordinary people who had refused to betray their principles even when faced with manufactured evidence and sophisticated deception. In the end, the conspiracy's greatest weakness had been its failure to understand the true source of the monarchy's strength. Not the institution itself, but the people who served it faithfully, day after day, year after year. The security breach at Kensington Palace would be remembered not as a moment of vulnerability, but as proof that some things, loyalty, truth, and service, remain stronger than any deception that power and technology can create.